Hi, I want to talk to you today about an argument from Norman Bowie. He argues that people have a right to meaningful work. There's an internal and an external question here. The internal question is about the obligation of the employer, that the employer has a perfect obligation to give the employee meaningful work. That is to say, a job that is meaningful. And we're going to talk about what exactly that means in a moment. The external question is simply the question of whether people in general have a right to meaningful work, whether they have a right to a job with those features. That latter question, the external question, is really primarily a question of social and political philosophy. So for now, I'm going to put it aside. The question most relevant to business ethics, I take it, is the internal question. The employer is hiring the employee to do a job of some kind, and is it owed that job be a meaningful job? Now, what exactly would that mean? First glance, you might think, meaning is pretty subjective. And I'm going to come back to that point. I think there is something right about that. Meaning is subjective, or at least relative to something. But Bowie gives us criteria for meaningful work. So what exactly constitutes meaningful work? The first thing is it has to be free. Free and not coerced. It has to be work that somebody has chosen. So it's got to be something that someone enters into voluntarily, freely, without coercion. The second condition is that meaningful work should allow the employee some degree of autonomy, some degree of independence. So the employee should be able to make certain kinds of decisions. In other words, the employer has an obligation to delegate certain things to the employee so that the employee has an opportunity to make some decisions on the job, to choose how they want to do the work. The third condition is closely related. The job should be one that allows the employee to develop his or her rational capacities. It should be something where you have to use your mind. Of course, to the extent that you are exercising autonomy and some degree of independence, you'll be making some decisions. And so it makes sense that such a job would actually develop rational capacities. But maybe there is something new contributed by this criterion. The job should be one that develops rational capacities, that allows you to develop. It should give you the opportunity for greater training, for greater education, for experience adding to your abilities in this particular job. And so it's one where you should be able to get better, not only at the job, but in general at thinking through problems of a certain kind. The fourth condition is that meaningful work offers a wage that is sufficient for physical welfare. Sometimes that's called a living wage. It's enough to get by on. And so the thought here is that if somebody has a job that pays them so little, they really can't survive on that. That's not meaningful work. Meaningful work is one that fairly compensates someone. The fifth criterion is that it should be a job that supports someone's moral development. So not only rational development, but moral development. Now again, you might think that's really entailed in the idea of autonomy and independence. But of course, not necessarily. It could be that I'm employing people to be hitmen in a sort of mafia-like enterprise, and that presumably doesn't promote people's moral development. So this is going to entail that, yes, not only do I have to delegate certain tasks to the employees, but they better be tasks that it's morally acceptable for the employees to fulfill. In fact, ideally, it's one that's going to depend on the employees to make decisions, and moral criteria are going to be relevant to that. So they're going to be evaluated in part on the moral quality of their decision-making. The last criterion is that meaningful work should not interfere with the pursuit of happiness of the employee. It should not interfere with the conception the employee has of his or her own happiness. And so it should be one that allows somebody to pursue a life on the side. Someone should be able to pursue happiness in their own way without the job constantly interfering with that. How might a job interfere with that? Well, maybe by leaving them no personal time at all to pursue happiness as they see it. But maybe it would be that it so skews character that it interferes with their ability to, for example, concentrate or devote undivided attention to people, to develop, you might say, aspects of their personality that matter to them. So it shouldn't be one that crunches a person's personality or leaves them no time for other pursuits. It should be one that actually promotes, ideally, but if not promotes, at least does not interfere with their own pursuit of happiness as they see it. There are two basic questions I want to ask here. The first one has to do with the connection between meaning and these criteria. Are they really necessary conditions for a job's having meaning for someone? And if that's not what's at stake, then what exactly does Bowie mean by meaningful in this context? But in any case, we need to ask, are these necessary conditions for meaningfulness? And the second question is, does this conception really follow from Kant's idea of rights, in particular rights as it might apply to the employer-employee relationship? Let's first of all think about the question of meaningfulness and say, are these necessary conditions? First one, the job is to be freely entered into. Is that a necessary condition? Well, it's certainly a desirable thing. John Stuart Mill counts somebody an agent of an action only if their action is free and voluntary and informed. And so, in particular, the employee-employer relationship should not involve coercion. It should not involve a deception of any kind. It should allow the employee choice. But is that a question of meaningfulness? After all, that's really a question in Mill of agency. So we could say, yes, this is a necessary condition for agency, but is agency required for meaningful work? I very much doubt that it is. It seems morally desirable, but on the other hand, it has nothing in particular to do with meaningfulness. A good contrast might be with somebody who is a draftee, in times of war especially, but also throughout much of our history during peacetime. People could be drafted into the military, and they might find what they're doing in the military meaningful, even though they did not volunteer, they were drafted. It was not their choice, in other words, but it could still be meaningful. Somebody might be drafted and sent into a war zone. Let's say it's a medic who is there helping wounded soldiers survive. That person might find great meaning in what they're doing, even though they're not there voluntarily. Let's look at the second condition. It should be something that allows for a certain degree of autonomy or independence. Is that a necessary condition? Well, it seems more plausible. It's a little hard to imagine somebody finding meaning in doing an assembly line job, let's say. All you do is put on this screw and tighten it all day long. Still, it's hard to say that no one could find meaning in that work. Maybe they do. Maybe they're very proud of the role that they play in actually creating that particular product, that cell phone, or that automobile. And so it's hard to say that really is something that precludes meaning if it fails. Now, admittedly, again, autonomy, having some decision-making authority, having some degree of independence, those seem like desirable things. They're good things. But are they things people have a right to? We'll get to that question in a moment. Are they necessary conditions for meaning? Well, they sure help. It's not clear to me that they are necessary for that. But maybe at least they're intimately connected enough that we could say, well, yeah, maybe it's not strictly necessary, but it's something that is going to make it at least much more highly likely that someone will find that job meaningful. The third criterion, it should allow for someone's rational development, develop their rational capacities. Well, admittedly, that's again a desirable thing, but is a job that allows for the development of rational capacities necessary for meaningfulness? There's actually another question we might ask here, which is, what exactly is being ruled out here? What kind of jobs don't allow for the development of your rational capacities? I'm going to come back to that question. It's not clear to me that this one actually has much content. But, in any case, could I find meaning in something that doesn't allow me to develop rationally? That really is a matter of doing something in a kind of rote way where I don't have to think about it. Well, maybe, because after all, if I don't have to think about what I'm doing, it may be that I can think about whatever I want to think about. All I have to do is, let's say, hit this thing with a hammer as it comes by. Well, I can think about whatever I want. One summer in college, I spent much of the summer scrubbing white vinyl walls in a 27-story building. That was not fun. That was maybe the most psychologically difficult job I've had. But on the other hand, did it allow for the development of rational capacities? Sure, it didn't require any rational thought, any rational decision-making to go about scrubbing these white vinyl walls. In that sense, it was unbelievably boring. But nevertheless, it was something that gave me time to think about anything I wanted. In fact, I ended up memorizing a lot of poetry. I would bring a book of Catullus or Virgil or Wallace Stevens, and I would look at the stanza as I got down to put my rag or brush in a bucket, and then I would go up onto these steps and I would scrub while I was repeating that stanza to myself. I still remember some of those poems. I do not know which to prefer, the beauty of inflection or the beauty of innuendo, the sound of the blackbird whistling or just after. That's from one of the poems, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird, that I memorized that summer. And there were lots of others. In any case, it did allow for the development of my rational capacities, not because of the scrubbing, but to some extent, mindless jobs do tend to give you mental space to think about other things. And so I've known of people who actually like jobs of sitting there all through the night as a security guard, just because it doesn't develop their rational capacities, but it gives them space to do it. In any case, it's not clear to me that this is something that is really a necessary condition, or even that it has much content at all. The fourth condition is that you should be paid a living wage. But again, that seems irrelevant from the point of view of meaningfulness. Maybe it's a desirable thing for other reasons, but it doesn't seem a necessary condition. I might be an unpaid intern and find great meaning in what I'm doing. And so the thought that I'm paid a certain level seems independent of the question of whether the job is meaningful. I might find it actually quite challenging, a fascinating thing to give me a glimpse into a world I had not known before, but I might be paid nothing at all, or maybe paid a minimal amount. It's nothing to live on, but I'm learning a lot from it. And so it seems as if wages are just completely independent of questions of meaningfulness. The fifth condition is that it should promote somebody's moral development. Well, again, is that a question of meaning? I don't know. I'm thinking of the character played by Max von Sydow in 3 Days of the Condor. He's a professional killer, and he finds great meaning in that work. He enjoys it. He tries to convince Robert Redford to join him in that profession near the end of the movie. But, well, that's not good for your moral development. I do not recommend such a job if you want to seek moral development. But is it something in which someone could not possibly find meaning? Is it something that is meaningless work? I doubt it. It may have a horrible meaning in many contexts, but it doesn't seem meaningless. And the same thing is true, I think, of other jobs that put somebody in a kind of position of moral hazard. It's not a good thing. But on the other hand, is it something that precludes it from being meaningful? I doubt it. Thieves can find meaning in what they do. Think about the movie The Italian Job. Those guys find meaning in all of that, in addition to loot. And so that seems neither here nor there from the point of view of meaningfulness. The last condition, not interfering with an employee's pursuit of happiness. I don't know. Is this something that is connected to meaningfulness? Something might interfere with my pursuit of happiness, but that doesn't seem to make it meaningless from my point of view. Again, it's a good and desirable thing. I want people to be able to pursue happiness, so all of these things seem like desirable features for a job to have. But on the other hand, is it that I can't experience meaning in this job? I can't find it meaningful unless it leaves me space to pursue happiness as I choose. Maybe I find it brutal. Maybe I find it incredibly difficult. I have no time left for anything else. Maybe I am, for example, an internist at a hospital, and I'm overwhelmed. I have no time to pursue happiness or think about much of anything. Just watch Grey's Anatomy for an idea of what this might be like. But I might have something that I consider tremendously meaningful in what I'm doing. And so it seems again as if a job allowing me the space to pursue happiness in my own way and a job that is meaningful, they just seem like two totally different things. I could have something that leaves me plenty of time and space, doesn't interfere with anything, but on the other hand is really dull and I find it completely meaningless. There could be something else that I find immensely meaningful, but so all-absorbing that there is no time to even think about the pursuit of happiness. But there's really a deeper issue here. And that is that I think all work can be meaningful. Partly that's because I think there is a subjective element to this, or at least a relative element to this. Arma virumque cano is something that means nothing in English. It means something in Latin. I sing of arms in the man. It's the opening of Virgil's Aeneid. I think work is like that. It might be meaningful from one point of view, meaningless from another point of view. So it's hard to say, I think, for a given person, what will be meaningful for them. It depends on their worldview. It depends on what they take pride in, what they find meaning in. What will be meaningful for one won't be meaningful for another. And so it's hard to even make sense of this idea of work being meaningful, full stop, for anyone, for any rational agent. Presumably, people find meaning in lots of different ways and from lots of different things. From that point of view, any job can be meaningful. There is no job that is such that nobody can find meaning in it. Now, sometimes it's easier than other times. When I was scrubbing one of those white vinyl-walled floors of the building, and it was very clean, there were no smokers on that floor, well, it was hard to find meaning because it looked the same when I was done as it did before I started. But when I got to a dirty floor, for some reason, that was wonderful. I took meaning in scrubbing that dirt off and leaving it looking spick and span. And the same thing can be true for other things. I spent a good part of one summer fixing air conditioning units. Meaningful? Well, pretty rote. Get up there. I still have a slightly sore neck, actually, from working overhead in those closets on these air conditioning units. But still, it was something I found meaning in. And so I can't say, though it's not my favorite job, I can't say this was meaningless or that somebody had to find no meaning in it. It didn't allow for a large degree of pursuit of happiness. It didn't allow for a lot of intellectual development because it actually took enough attention. I wasn't able to think about lots of other things. But still, it was something I freely chose. And it was something I did find meaningful, even if it's something that Bowie would presumably not find meaningful. So the point is this. I don't think any job is actually just meaningless by its very nature. I think anything is something somebody can find meaning in. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's easy. Depends on your point of view. And that's an element of this that is completely missing. Even if we put aside the question of meaning and say this is really about desirability, that meaningfulness is a red herring, we can still say people like different kinds of jobs for very different reasons. My grandfather was one of the wisest people I ever knew. He was a plumber. He loved being a plumber. He would have hated what I do. In fact, I can't imagine him sitting through one day of graduate seminars in order to get a PhD in philosophy. Is it because he didn't have the intelligence? Not at all. He just wouldn't have had the patience for it. He would have seen it as a completely useless enterprise. I think that's a general problem, and it's a problem about desirability just as well. He would have found this job incredibly undesirable. I would have found his job undesirable. And in short, I don't think we can generalize a lot about this, at least beyond very, very broad characterizations. Yeah, it's a good thing for jobs to be entered into freely, for you to have some degree of independence in how you do them, for you to be respected on the job, though. That seems to me the important thing. Kant stresses you should be respected. You have the right to be treated as an end in yourself. That's what matters. The rest, well, is a good thing from that point of view, probably not a necessary thing. And what people want is so variable that it's hard to say anything more, I think, about what employees are entitled to, other than respect.